So price versus cost, I guess Kiwi's mentality is how cheap can I build it and how much can I make when I sell it? Hence what leads us down the road of developers and spec houses and stuff like that. For us as a company, it's all about what legacy are we going to leave, and our legacy is obviously leaving the place in a better way than what we found it, and hopefully by building these homes is going to help doing that. So that's our key focus, and we've drawn a line in the sand. We won't build code minimum. It'll always be well above, whatever that looks like, whether it's complete air tightness or whatever. There's a few things we won't go back on, roll back like the H1 thermal upgrades or whatever they call it. So price versus cost. So we've got what are you actually paying for it, but what's going to cost you in the long run, or what it could potentially save you, being your power, your health, your mental health for one. There's a lot of people that live in cold, damp houses that develop, depression because of it. They can't. Their kids are always getting sick, or they're spending too much on heating their houses. So it's one of the things that's very, very important. So what I'll talk about is a house that we're doing in Geraldine. I've got some real brief figures on the differences in price based on a building code minimum. So for a start, it's 167 square metres. It's only a 2.4 stud, gables both ends. So it's a pretty simple house, 3 bedroom, 2 bathroom. So the foundation, if we had just a standard rib raft and we wanted to add 50 mils of EPS to the whole of the underfloor, not just in the ribs of the pods and up the sides, it's going to cost $2,100. So that's just the materials. I'm not worried about labour at the moment. So that gives you a bit of an idea. Over the build cost, it's a very small part of the build. So that's a no-brainer. For people that want to try and calculate out to see how much small amount of insulation we put on there, it just seems like a waste of time to me. So there's $2,100. The difference between a service cavity insulation and not having one on a 90 mil frame. So if you've got a standard 90 mil frame, 90 mil stud to the building code, or 3604, where you've got a triple stud corner. Everyone knows what a triple stud corner, when I'm talking about with that? Yeah, no? No? Okay. So a triple stud corner is where 2 corners meet, whether it's external or internal. You have 3 studs to form that corner. Basically, a stud and a block and a stud, and then where the wall butts to it, you have another stud. This is to pick up the linings on the inside, basically. So what we do is we have basically a 2 stud corner, or a California corner, where you have 1 stud that finishes the wall and the other one butts into it. That means you get your insulation right into the corners. Because a lot of the time that you have a triple stud corner, the houses get built, they get wrapped, and that's always a weak point where it's never insulated. If you go down any subdivision and you have a look at the internal corner or external corner, it'll never be insulated. So we have a 90 mil stud, and then if we add a service cavity, which you can see up in that front room, we've just got a sample of what we do there, and the service cavity insulation on that particular house, the upgrade is $1,900 to add a service cavity. Again, this is just materials, service cavity and insulation, $1,900 over the cost of the build. So if you take into account now credits by the way of losing a stud in each corner, each internal and external corner, plus the internal frames as well, you can do the same thing, and 2 rows of dwangs, you're now getting an up cost of only $1,200 versus $1,900. So if you were doing a 6x2 wall, your cost to upgrade to a service cavity with service cavity insulation is now only $547, because the area of the wall, the insulated wall area is the same, and obviously the linear metre of wall area is the same. It's just that the 6x2 is more expensive, so you get a larger credit because you're using less of that timber. So versus $6 a linear metre versus $9, say. So that's why, again, so now you add another $547 onto your build to get the thermal efficiency of the service cavity insulation and stuff like that. If we go to the difference between what H1 was in the ceiling insulation, it was 3.3, we'll call it 3.3 on the ceiling, and now they're doubling it to 6.6. So on a house that's, say, 220 square metres, To supply and install an extra layer of ceiling insulation is going to be at, say, call it $16 a square metre for supply and install, based on that's before you do any deals with your supplier. That's $3,500. So if you were talking about the overall build cost, and I think so, I saw some data, currently I think standard building code is about $2,800 a square metre to build. If you have $220 square metres and that ceiling insulation at $3,500, that's only 0.57% of your build cost at $2,800 a square metre over that size house. So the current talk about the H1 rollback, they're saying it's costing $35,000 to $50,000 for all of these upgrades for the H1. So I'm not too sure who they're talking to, but yeah, like I say, there are some pretty basic numbers. But you know, from there, I don't think we're even at 10 grand yet just for materials. So if that's and what some of the studies they're talking about, they're saving, that can save you up to 40% of your bill. So using round figures, if you've got in a standing building code house at $500 a month in power, which I know some of them are, pumping the heaters into it, and you're saving over 10 months, that's 5 grand, chop that in half, at 40%, or even if you say 50%, that's 2.5 grand. So there's your insulation to your foundation paid for already after 1 year. Like I say, you guys are all here for the same reason why we are. You're wanting to learn more, or you want to do this. So it's like preaching to the choir, I suppose you could say. So then you can add on things like ventilation and stuff like that. Having fresh air coming to you 24 hours a day is very important, and costs for that can start from 3 grand for say a Lunos, which is a through the wall. It's not a balanced ventilation system, but it's still heat transfer. They start at 3 grand. You can go all the way up to 30 grand for a Wolf, which is a certified passive. So average that we normally use in a house is about $10,000 to $15,000 for a balanced ventilation, which will give you about 90% recovery in your heat that you're taking to the outside, or where it transfers over. So obviously we talked about windows and window costs. That could be cost neutral if you put the squeeze on some of the suppliers, and straight away that's a benefit as well, because obviously the hole in the wall, all these holes here, is where energy is going to go to and leak out, especially if you're doing just standard aluminium or thermally broken with double glaze. So your expectations should be in line with your budget. A lot of the time that people's expectations are not in line with their budget, but that's okay. It's just a matter of working through that and finding the right recipe for them. The thermal envelope is the stuff that you can't change. The insulated foundation, your high performance walls, your windows, recessed windows, ventilation systems. You can retrofit ventilation system, air tightness layers and stuff like that. That's where, if you've got a limited budget, and I really mean a limited budget, whether it be $500,000 or $1 million, you should do as much as you can in those areas, and then forsake the stuff that is the glitter, the stone bench tops. So for example, like we talked about the $3,500 for that insulation in that house we're talking about. The difference between, say, a Formica bench top, a category A and a category B or C stone bench top might be 5 grand. Put your Formica bench top in first. 5 years later, when you can afford it, you put a stone bench top in. That pays for the extra layer of bats or whatever. That's the thinking that people should have, is what can I do? Where can I save money? But where can I save and put that money into where it's important? And that's where it's important, is the thermal envelope. So that's the mindset that we really want everybody to be on, rather than fancy bench tops, fancy toilets, whatever. Your big 75-inch screen TV.